I see you guys have your notebooks out. That's good. We got a couple minutes before class starts. I want to go over a couple of principles that are behind a basic training method that we use that's very effective at helping you develop explosive power in your movements. But before we get into the details of that training method, we have some preliminary work to do. There's some basic physiological concepts that you have to be familiar with. Now, the first thing you need to know, the muscular system is basically a lever system. When you contract a muscle, it exerts a pulling force. So if I'm holding a dumbbell and I want to raise that dumbbell in the air, what muscle group contracts? My biceps, of course, and they're pulling, allowing me to raise that dumbbell. Now, I could, of course, just relax my muscles and let gravity do the work on the way back down, but if I want to lower it at a slow and steady pace, my biceps are going to contract again. They're still exerting a pulling force, but now they're working to allow me to lower this in a controlled manner. So there's different muscle contractions that you need to be familiar with. When I'm raising the dumbbell up in the air, that's a concentric contraction. That's a contraction in which the muscle shortens. So as I lift the dumbbell, my biceps pull, but as they pull, the muscle itself actually shortens along the way. Now when I'm lowering it back down, you've likely figured out that if it shortens on the way up, it's going to lengthen on the way down, and that's called an eccentric contraction. Now there are isometric contractions. Those are contractions in which the muscle length doesn't change. If you pin multiple body parts against each other and apply opposing force, so if you're pushing one arm up and one arm down, your arms aren't moving, but there is muscular contraction involved in maintaining that posture, well, that's an isometric contraction. The muscle length isn't going to change. You also have isometric contractions at play when you're performing various movements, and these isometric contractions work to stabilize the body, to stabilize the joints. So those are your basic contractions, different types of contractions. Now, what we're going to do is look at how these contractions are at play, how they work together in plyometric training. You guys have done plyometric training before. I haven't necessarily used that name, but we perform plyometric exercises. This is sometimes called jump training. Don't get confused, though. That doesn't mean that the only exercises that are involved in plyometric training are literally jumping. We can rebound with our legs. We can launch ourselves off the ground with our arms, doing explosive push-ups. So these are exercises that force us to launch our body off of a surface or rebound off a surface, performing an explosive movement, plyometric training. So what's involved? How do the different types of contractions work together? There's actually 3 phases to performing a plyometric exercise, and you'll notice 2 of the phases are the types of contractions that we just defined for you. So what's special about plyometric training is the way that these 2 contractions work together to allow you to perform a movement with as much explosive power behind it as possible. You'll notice the eccentric contraction comes first. And that's the case because the eccentric contraction, that muscle lengthening contraction, serves much like stretching back a spring. It serves to store elastic potential energy that then we use to allow us to perform our explosive movement during our concentric contraction, our muscle shortening contraction. Now there's this amortization phase in the middle. If you think of an explosive push-up, you lower yourself down, you have to stop before you launch yourself back up. You have to stop and stabilize, and that's basically what this phase is. But here's the important thing to understand here. If you increase this phase, if you stop at the bottom and you hold it for a prolonged period of time, you're going to experience energy loss. Some of this potential energy is going to be lost, and you're not going to be able to put it to use when you perform the concentric contraction. If you decrease this time, you're going to make better use of the elastic properties of your muscles, and you're going to find you're going to get a more forceful contraction, a more explosive response as a result.